Okay, let's do one more video on some of these argument concepts, and then I'll work through some of the exercises to reinforce them. All right, so we've talked about validity, valid, invalid. Valid argument is an argument where the premises entail the conclusion. All right, we gave that strict definition of it. I have it on the handout. An argument where if the premises were all true, the conclusion would have to be true. And that's our most precise way of getting that idea that the premises require the conclusion. Whether or not the premises are true, if you assume them to be true, remember I talked about those, right? Imagine a scenario. The conclusion has to be true. Okay, so you can think of an argument as kind of setting up a world, right? I did that in the last video. I talked about if you're in a world, all you know is that all cats are mammals. Cleo is a cat. What else do you know, right? So premises of an argument set up a world. Okay, here's the world. What could be one premise, two premise, five premises, six premises. We've been looking at all two premise arguments, but it could be any number of premises, one or more. It sets up the world. Here's the things that I'm saying are true, and so I'm going to deduce a further conclusion on the basis of those premises. Okay, and the relationship we're looking at with that is valid, invalid. Okay, I've got one more. Okay, one more concept here. Okay, right. When that link is there between premise and conclusion, it's valid. If it's not there, the argument's invalid. Okay. Okay. Another question is whether the premises are all true, which is an independent question, as I alluded to last time. Right? It's another question. Validity is about the link between premise and conclusion. That link can exist between false statements, even with false premises, right? So there's another question, are the premises true? When we're actually making arguments, what we want to do is make true assertions, right, to deduce true conclusions, right? But we can use logic in other ways, right? We can reason from false statements. Maybe we disagree with someone, right? We say, well, if what you say is right, this follows. Do you agree with that? Right? So we can reason from false statements, but an argument that is valid and has true premises is what we're going for, because the conclusion then would also have to be true. Okay? So we can ask, does the argument have true premises? And the term Hardegree uses for all true premises is factually correct. I know this might be hard to read, but again, you have it on the handout. I'm just laying it out here. The term he uses for all true premises, we're ignoring the conclusion for this term, is factually correct. An argument with all true premises, we're just going to use the term factually correct. The premises are all true. Okay? If one or more of the premises is false, if any of the premises are false, it's not factually correct. By the way, we're using that terminology. Okay? Factually correct equals all true premises. Premises. Okay? There's a separate question about whether the conclusion is true. Okay? Because, for example, you could have an invalid argument with true premises and a false conclusion. Right? You can't have what? You can't have a valid argument that's also factually correct. That has to have a true conclusion. It can't have a false conclusion. Right? That's the only thing that's forced. So, but mostly these questions are independent. You want to know if the premises are true? Check the premises. Ignore the argument. Just check whether the premises are true. Cats are mammals. Yeah, that's true. Cats are lizards. No, that's false. All mice are cows. False. All cows eat. All cows are mammals. That's true, right? And those can be in different combinations. Okay. So, true conclusion, same deal. Is the conclusion true? Right. All cats are mammals. Cleo's a cat, so Cleo's a mammal. That's true. I've given you, though, invalid arguments with true conclusions, right? So an invalid argument can be factually correct. An invalid argument can have true conclusions. What do I mean by can? I mean there are examples of it. Okay, our definitions have not ruled that out. You can have an invalid argument that does not have the appropriate link between premise and conclusion, but nonetheless have true statements. In fact, it's easy to do. It's easy to do. I've given you examples already. You just reason badly from true statements. It's very easy to do, right? Our cats are mammals example is this, right? All cats are mammals. Cleo is a cat. Sorry, that was going to be valid. Cleo is a mammal. So Cleo is a cat is invalid, but these statements are of course true. So is the conclusion in this case. Okay? So you have to recognize that validity only rules out valid argument, true premises, cannot have a false conclusion. Everything else there are examples of. Everything else there are examples of. There's valid arguments where the link is there, but one of the premises is false, or at least one. It's not factually correct. There are examples of that with false conclusions. There's examples of valid, factually incorrect, false premises, and true conclusions, right? We can put these in any combination. The only combination we can't have is valid, factually correct, false conclusion. There are no examples of that. By definition, if you have factually correct but a false conclusion, the link can exist because the link guarantees you go from true to true. The valid link guarantees it, right? So, right, all valid arguments with true premises have true conclusions. The reverse is not true, right? This is a theme. Not there premises with true arguments with true premises and a true conclusion. Some of those are invalid. Okay. All valid arguments with true premises also have a true conclusion. There are other arguments with true premises and a true conclusion, but when it's valid and factually correct, guaranteed it has a true conclusion. This you cannot have. Okay. We'll talk through this with the examples and keep thinking through this again. Valid arguments guarantee the conclusion. So when you have a valid argument and it's factually correct, you're guaranteed the true conclusion. Otherwise, you can't assume that because it's invalid it has false premises, or because it's invalid it has a false conclusion, or because it's invalid it has a true conclusion. You can't assume just because it's valid, you can't assume that it has a true conclusion. You have to at least see whether the premises are true. Okay? Remember also, this means you can have valid false premises and true conclusion. You can have valid false premises, not factually correct, but a true conclusion. Okay? And when you start to think of examples of here, this is how logic has to work. It has to be this way. Okay? That you can get this is not a good way to reason to this true conclusion because you used false premises, but you have to be able to see that this is possible. It'd be too strong to say if we use false premises in a good argument, we're guaranteed a false conclusion. No, that's way too strong. Way too strong. Right? What validity does is guarantee that a valid argument, the premises require the conclusion. The premises require the conclusion, but that's all they do. Okay, we'll look at examples to try and pin this down. Okay, the other thing to mention. All right, so valid, factually correct. Separate question: does it have a true conclusion? Except in this one case, if you know that if it's valid and factually correct, you know that it has a true conclusion. Right, that's right. Here, this combo x'd out. You cannot have this combo. You can't have these two and also have a false conclusion. Valid, factually correct, always has a false conclusion. We call those arguments sound. If it's valid and factually correct, we call that sound. Again, that's a very specialized use of sound, just like it's specialized use of valid. So you just have to latch on to that, right? The definition of sound is a valid argument that's factually correct. Okay. Now that guarantees a true conclusion. So all sound arguments also have true conclusions. Not the reverse. It's not that Does every argument with a true is every argument with a true conclusion sound? No, not by a long shot. Not by a long shot. There are invalid arguments that are sound. There are arguments with false premises that are sound. There are valid arguments with false premises and sorry, let me back up. That was wrong. Right. Do all arguments with a true conclusion, are they sound? No. There are there are there are arguments with false premises that have a true conclusion. And those are not sound, but they have a true conclusion. So, true conclusion doesn't equal sound. Sound guarantees true conclusion, right? Oh, that right? Cats and mammals, squares and four-sided figures, right? All sound arguments have true conclusions. Not all arguments with true conclusions are sound. Sound requires valid and factually correct. If you have those two together, you're guaranteed true conclusion. We call that and we call the two together sound. Valid argument, all true premises. Those two together we call sound. Okay. Right? And that's kind of the gold standard when we're making arguments to try to deduce true conclusions. That's the gold standard. Right? We want to use true statements and lead to true conclusions. All cats are mammals. Cleo is a cat, so Cleo is a mammal. Valid deduction with true premises. Conclusion also must be true. Okay. The last thing to note here, these are independent questions because it's the form of the argument, the pattern, talk a little more about pattern, that determines validity. It's not the statements themselves, by themselves. It's not whether you have true statements, false statements. Now, I've spent all my time in these videos on this, right? The difference between a valid argument and an argument with true premises. Do all valid arguments have true premises? No. Can invalid arguments have true premises? Yes, right? Okay, these combos exist, right? And that's what the homework's mainly going to be about. So I want you to pin that down. It'll be tricky, but I want us to pin that down. It's the form of the argument, the pattern, the relation that sets up a relationship between premise and conclusion. I've tried to give us examples that makes an argument valid or invalid. Okay? The content is irrelevant to that pattern except that it's related, right? All cats are mammals. Cleo's a cat. There's a certain logical relationship, but that's a formula that works for other statements, right? All squares are shapes. This shape is a square, so this is a square, so it's a shape, right? All squares have four sides. This shape has four sides, so it's a square is invalid, right? And that's they're all right. You can see that these different arguments follow the same pattern. All A is B, C is A, so it's B. That's valid. For example, there are other valid forms, valid patterns. Okay. Mainly these videos are to at least set us up with these terms, and then when we see them in the exercises, I can reinforce these.